Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have someone very special with us today, and we have actually uh, made it possible to get Manak with us, who is part of the YP Foundation, the Youth Collective Forum, and he has been part of promoting human rights and promoting rights of the marginalized community from a really, really long time. So thank you, Manak, for joining us today. And there aren't enough words that I can use to describe what he has done over several years of his experience as volunteer, as activist, as a feminist, as a person who promotes human rights in whichever forum he gets. So I'll just pass on this question to him. That Manak, can you just give us your introduction and then we'll jump on to the interview.
Sure. Thank you. I think if I have to introduce myself, I'll just say that I am from Delhi. I have been part of and have learned from the women's rights and queer rights movement as a student on campus and immediately after finishing my education, and have been working mostly with development organizations, particularly in the areas of youth leadership development, gender, sexuality issues, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. So that has been the trajectory of my work. And a lot of the work that I do is aimed at facilitating young people's leadership of social justice, human rights related issues, and particularly with a focus on issues of gender and sexuality. So that's the work that I do. I am urban from Delhi. I identify as male. I also identify as gay, and I'm part of the queer movement in India. That's maybe the larger background of my lens of seeing the world.
Thank you for introducing yourself. And you are part of a very big organization, all run by very young people, both the YP Foundation and the Youth Collective Forum. So can you just tell us a little bit about both these organizations, what you do and what the organization does do?
Sure. I've had the privilege of working with both of these organizations, with Commute Me, the Youth Collective, and now with the YP Foundation. Both organizations in a similar way kind of work towards ensuring that young people are represented in any programs, policies, any kind of work that is done with young people is done together with young people at the leadership of that kind of work. Both organizations work on developing young people's human rights-based perspectives to engage with social change, with governance, with health equity, etc. So that's something that the organizations also do. And the Youth Collective particularly is a very interesting, quasi think tank collective kind of space where a whole lot of organizations led by young people and that are interested in youth work, even if they're not led by young people, are coming together and co-creating many approaches, models, programs, and conversations which aim to improve, how work with young people is done and also how youth work as a field is seen in India and internationally. And I think that the power of the Youth Collective now is in that kind of really strong, robust, and diverse collective that comes together to form that organization and body. The YP Foundation, we are a smaller Delhi-based organization, but we work across different states in India. We are a feminist and rights-based organization that develop young people's leadership. And we are interested in young people taking lead on issues of social justice, health equity, gender justice, sexuality rights, and a whole range of approaches which ensure, like I said earlier, that young people are leading that work and not only being the beneficiaries of how those programs and policies are implemented. So that's how we enter the play as the YP Foundation. Interestingly, our conception, actually, YP Foundation came together as a group of young people who felt that there isn't enough space to talk about social issues, to talk about social reality for young people around in institutions. And the idea of the organization was that there should be more and more spaces that are youth-led and that are having this conversation with young people on how to develop your perspective on social reality and then take positive action. So that's really how we came together. And we see ourselves and we want to be standing in both these boats of development sector, organized development sector work, as well as rights-based movements and activism. So that's the two spaces that we try continuously to bring together for ourselves and for any young person who associates with us.
Thank you. That is all very that is very insightful, and that is also very interesting to know that you're trying to create both the things in terms of opportunities and awareness. So, can you tell a bit of a difference that you have found in way young people approach a problem? Let's say the queer movement, for that matter, or any other, for example, the Me Too movement, for that matter. So, the way the young people have approached it, and the difference between the people who are of slightly older age or slightly older activists. Can you tell your experience how it has been between them?
Sure. This is an interesting conversation also because just yesterday I was talking to somebody about how my generation of people, right, in development work and in activism right now are the in between generation. We are not the senior feminists. We are not the senior activists quite yet, but we're also not the young activists. And so we are kind of in between, seeing both of these. And this is also a time across these movements, whether it is in queer movement, whether it is in the Me Too movement, where there is also a lot of friction between what younger activists, younger feminists are saying, how they approach the field and this work and these issues, and how senior feminists have sort of engaged with that. There is a lot of friction. I wouldn't say who somebody is right or somebody is wrong, but I feel that there is a lot of friction. I think partly what also tends to happen is that as you grow in a movement and as you grow in a sector, you also, at least within that space, become the person who's holding power. And I feel the work of feminist queer activism is actually in continuously reflecting on where the power is centered and trying to distribute it, redistribute it in some way. And I also think that there is a long history and background of work and I think some of, in many ways, younger activists are chaffing against that there are power centers, there are sort of hierarchies of power within movements as well. And many times, senior activists and movements will turn around and say, where are the young people, where they have not yet seen the young people who are there, or, brought them into leadership in those movements, or recognize the fact that young people are already leading movements and they are not considered part of the other broader movement as such, right? That's one situation that I see happening. The other thing that I see happening is that many people, my generation, younger generations, are being able to do what we are doing only because all these senior activists have actually laid the groundwork for it, right? So the Me Too movement is not emerging in isolation out of nowhere. It is emerging out of years of, in India, if I look at it, the LOSHA, the list of sexual offenders that came around, the Me Too movement and the call outs that are happening, that have been happening, and legal action that has gone on around this issue is standing on the shoulders of years of activism and work on, say, the Vishakha judgment, or on how the criminal, the sexual harassment laws have been amended, have been worked on over a period of years, how these systems have been developed with a lot of hard work. And it is, I feel sometimes that it's unfortunate that in many conversations, it comes to confrontation, and that this conversation only tends to happen in public statements and not in more collaborative, learning and reflective oriented spaces. And I feel that in movements, we need to continuously create that kind of a space to be able to learn. I mean, that is the history of the women's movement in India. The progressive women, the feminist movements in India have continuously learned and said, who else can we include? Who else have we left out? Can we learn from that and bring, more diversity to the way we work? And I think if that has to continue, then, what many feminists are also saying, it is important to call out in many ways. And the LOSHA and the whole movement has shown us that sometimes there is no other option, that your back is against the wall and there is nothing else that you're able to do. So there is an importance to calling out as a strategy and to publicly decrying something that has happened. But there is also a relevance to calling in and saying, can we have this conversation in slightly more collaborative way? And I think that I see that happening in small spaces, and I think that needs to expand more and more within the movement as much as in the world at large.
That is very interesting. And also that you brought up friction. So there's one sort of friction in the movement that we talk within the LGBT space, which is again, I think it is derived from very similar things about the feminist movement and LGBT movement not being able to go hand in hand, especially, and also the friction within the LGBT community of more or less representation of different groups. So is that something that you have faced or you have seen in India, how you or the organizations tackle it? Or is it something that just people read about and does not really have a very big impact on the movement?
So I think it's interesting what you're asking. It's also interesting to talk about organizational work and movements together, because I think we are very clear as an organization that while my organization can lead a program on queer rights, it cannot lead a movement on queer rights. That has to be led by queer communities of diverse people who are not perhaps organizations who are leading movements, right? Organizations that historically women's organizations have contributed to movement building, have learned from the movements, aligned with the movements, allied with the movements, as we continue to do now in feminist organizations. But organizations are not at the leadership of movements as such. Autonomous collectives have been, right? And I think it is important as organizations to be very conscious of this, our own position as people who are doing what we are doing with funding that is perhaps, partly Indian funding, foreign funding coming from corporate. All money is tainted in the world. There is no pure biased source of money in the world anymore in this kind of, corporate collective that we all live in. So I think it's very important to be conscious of your own position. Just as within a movement, within the feminist and women's rights movement, I would be very conscious of my own engagement as a man in that space and not take up that kind of space. A similar kind of caution needs to be exercised when we engage as organizations in movement. And so I think that's something that I would really like to upfront kind of place and say is important. I do think that, there have been various ways in which the queer rights movement has also stood on the shoulders of the women's rights movement. Sometimes maybe it is not the reality. It is a sort of my own experience of when I came into work on queer rights, at least development sector work on queer rights or women's rights, etc. And I must credit great organizations and collectives that sort of helped me understand that space for it. But I think my first impression was that, okay, men have collectivized, especially in like with the history of HIV funding coming in to support a lot of queer rights and target outreach and intervention with, TGs, MSM, quote unquote, how it was put in the early times. It seemed to me that men collectivize at hotspots and cruising areas and women collectivize in movements. And it has been very interesting then to see how, concerns of groups of men and concerns of groups of women are so distinctively different when we talk about even autonomous organizing, right? Like informal groups, where it was interesting to see in 2011, 12 even, when a lot of queer, youth groups were emerging, that, some of the groups actually just became, because of the way they used to meet, the freedom, the mobility, all of that, they were, factors too. The fact that the majority representation became of young men and boys in those groups. Because those were the people who were able to come out, stay late, do independent work, get that space from their family. It's something that we continuously do in for the last year, we haven't had the Pride March in Delhi, but, the Pride Party, for example, the fundraisers. Always sort of have to be conscious and start as early in the evening as possible, because a lot of women might not be able to come later at night. So I think it has been important for me, if I internalize it and not externalize it, to come to queer rights work through the route of women's rights work. Because then I have come to the consciousness of the fact that as a man doing this kind of work, as a cisgender man, I hold a lot of privilege. And there are many times when I need to just give up space and listen to others who are in leadership instead of taking on that kind of leadership and becoming the representative, because I am actually probably the most privileged in that set of queer people, as somebody who's urban, educated, with a certain kind of ability in my body, physical appearance, cisgenderness, all of that, gender. identity, and to sort of be conscious of that when I engage with activism. I think that has been important for me in the queer rights work as well as in the feminist activism that I'm part of.
That is very nice, because often people forget that even people who are discriminated come from some sort of privilege that they have because of some other identity, and then the people usually tend to either forget or not acknowledge that when they come to some other movement which is derived from some other sort of discrimination. So I think that is also very inspiring for whoever will be watching this, to understand that even you, if you are a part of movement and doing great things for the society, you still need to acknowledge the privileges that you have had. So thank you for that. And in terms of acknowledging and teaching and the increasing awareness, so I think that one of the things that I saw in the YP Foundation Instagram page, one of the biggest things that I saw was about the sexual and reproductive health and awareness around that. So is it something that is the main motive of the foundation, or is it something that you are taking up right now? And can you tell us a bit of your engagements around it?
Sure. So one of our flagship programs as an organization has been around increasing access to information, services and rights, as well as government programs and policies around sexual and reproductive health and well-being for young people and adolescents. That has been part of the core work of the organization. It is one of the longest running programs that we have, a program called Know Your Body, Know Your Rights, which actually implements comprehensive sexuality education in and out of schools across various states, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Delhi, in different states we implement now. And also then builds young people's leadership to engage with policies and programs being offered by the government to access this same information and these services. We also have a separate program called the Access Project that actually helps young people audit health services and whether or not sexual and reproductive health services that are available in government channels is youth-friendly, is non-judgmental, is affirming of diversities or not. And so we do a lot of that work, and a lot of that work is on capacity building at the first level, increasing young people's information levels through comprehensive sexuality education programs on what do we mean, like what is the information young people and adolescents should have about their own body, about the fact that it is okay to talk about sexual health and sexuality related issues. It is okay to ask for help and to be able to recognize symptoms of when you need help, and identify the channels of where this help will be and should be available to you. So that's part of our core work, and we take up the range of issues from growing up, puberty, contraception, looking at safe sex, risk risk reduction, also looking at a pleasure affirming, like the number of young people that grow up thinking menstruation is a bad thing, or sex, anything to do with sexuality or sex or sexual awareness is a bad thing. That's something that we really in our core want to change as an organization, the taboo around talking about sexuality issues. That's what we want to erase for young people. And so a lot of our work is actually built around that. So information is the first step. The second part is actually young people from that information taking leadership of doing something in their own communities. So then taking that campaign out there, taking a research project out there, finding out your own information, starting your own small project to do something. That's something that we are very interested in supporting young people to do. And at the final level, after you sort of become aware and had an experience of on-ground leadership of these issues, then being able to represent yourself and other young people in policy-making discussions, to be able to say, this is what needs to be done, and to be able to comprehensively represent young people's needs when policies and programs are developed. That's the whole scale of what we want to do on sexual and reproductive health and rights.
What is the response that you have received, especially from the institutions? For example, if you are trying to reach children about sexual awareness and about sexuality, for example, in big institutions, how is the response? That you get a lot of support, you have to work for a lot of support, or you don't get support?
It's been, I should be talking to my colleagues who actually do the running of the program. It has been hard. I would say it is easier now than it was, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, obviously. It has been hard to, in all spaces, get the space to talk about sexuality issues, of course. There have been instances where, when you're talking about menstruation, it's still fine. The moment you start talking about sex, teachers or whoever is around in that space will tell you, no, 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 this is wrong. Wind up now. Ho gaya abhi, isko khatam karo. That's too much. That's difficult to transact many times. There have been instances where there has been actual, fear and threat to a group of young people sitting and having a discussion about sexuality, say in a place like UP or in, conservative communities. So all of that is actually a challenge. We cannot give any handouts to young people because if they take them home, they might get into trouble. We spend a lot of time emphasizing why this information is important for health and for awareness. And it's not like we are sort of, the assumption automatically. There are a couple of very fun assumptions that we keep battling. The moment you talk to young people about sex, they'll start having it. Even though there is proven research globally that says if people have information, they will most likely take more responsible decisions around their sex lives. They've been shown to delay decisions around having sex with the correct information. But people think the moment you mention it, they'll start having sex. Nobody thinks that, films and whatever else is going on around that, young people are anyway seeing it, that everybody is blind to. The other is that, when we're talking about sexuality education, that we're just telling people how to have sex and why they should be having sex. That's what people think sexuality education is. And it has been sort of, interestingly, communities, teachers, frontline health workers all have this aha moment the moment you tell them that this curriculum actually is about understanding your own body, being able to create a supportive relationship with people around you, being able to recognize violence, being able to not be violent yourself. That is the whole trajectory of what this program takes up. It is really about skills that you need to be able to live a happy, fulfilling, violence-free life. And, it's kind of like that. When we talk also about feminist leadership, we would ask people, what kind of society do you want to envision for yourself? And they will say all these principles of, barabari honi chahiye, kisi ke upar zulm nahi hona chahiye, ye sab log bolte hain. And then you tell them this is what feminism says, and everybody has this aha moment saying, what? Is this what feminism says? Feminism doesn't say women should be beating up men. And we're like, no, actually it doesn't. So I think similarly, about sexuality education, a lot of these aha moments do happen. And we are very happy now that it has become possible to run these programs. The first step is reducing the stigma amongst young people themselves. सबसे पहले तो young लोग ही बोलते हैं कि ये सब गंदी बातें हैं, ये हमको क्यों बता रहे हो, ये तो मना करते हैं लोग, बता, don't tell us these bad things, all of this is bad. So we have to reduce the stigma in young people's minds, reduce the stigma in their parents, guardians, teachers' minds. And then start, and the joy happens where, somebody in, say, who's like 10, 11 years old, will, at the end of a program talking about, non-binary and diversity and genders and sexualities, all of that, will come in, still tell a facilitator, gender, yeah, we talked about gender, there are two kinds of gender. And we're like, oh God, they have gotten everything. And then they would come and say cisgender and transgender, and we're like, wow, excellent. This works. And you've understood this, and that's great. So I think we've had great moments of people, these great examples, and I can, we see videos also now, I think, of this young girl saying that, gender identity is like a platter of fruit. I like some of lychee, I like some of aam, I like some different kinds of fruit. Similarly, people could like different kinds of things and be different kinds of things, and there are a whole range of things that are possible. So when all of this kind of understanding, which we think is fairly complicated, how to tell young people, all adults get sort of conscious and troubled around it. When young people give it back to you in such simple and logical ways, that is really what the joy of doing this work is for us as an organization.
It is all very overwhelming to just do that these things happen, because usually everybody or anybody who supports the LGBT community, or for that matter the feminist movement, have a very troublesome time explaining people how equality and feminism means essentially the same thing. So that is all very overwhelming to listen to, and we can just keep going on with the stories, but I'll quickly jump on to the next question, which is about the trainings and training sessions and other things that you have done in terms of making people understand about gender violence and gender biases and all those things. Could you tell us a bit about how you do those trainings? Because we have been speaking to a lot of guests about having sessions in corporate organizations. You tell them about genders and tell them about sexuality. But someone who is working at the ground level of training and teaching people, can you tell us the strategies that you use or the kinds of programs you do to actually make it?
So there are a couple of different levels at which we work. So one is, of course, with young people directly. And each program will start incrementally. It will start with the most basic, understanding yourself, who you are, how you deal with the world, and incrementally go into, different issues and topics. With young people particularly, and with everybody actually, when we do training as an organization, the idea is to continuously be working off of relevant real issues of young people, right? So we've had to up our game many times in this conversation of, like for example, there are many of these, Bumble and Scruff and dating site and this, that, and the other that I learned about because I was in a training and some young person said, so what do you think about this site? It is saying this. There are so many gender options possible on this website. And I was like, oh, okay, let me go and find out and quickly make a profile and check it out and come back. So I think similarly as an organization, we are continuously learning from what young people are doing, and our model of implementing this program is through peer education. We have a group of young facilitators who we would train on certain core concepts, a really solid kind of in-depth training on core concepts and a very structured curriculum of what we want to implement. They take that sort of solid grounding that they get and then they adapt. So we've had situations where somebody sort of broke an activity down into making a crossword because that is what they're saying. We've had situations where one peer facilitator, I remember, said the boys are just not interested today in my session, so we'll just play football and tomorrow we'll have a conversation. That's also fine. So there is a lot of adapting that happens of this conversation by young people, and a lot of those adaptations then come back into informing our curriculum. We try and keep it interactive so that it's not like a boring lecture. It is working off of conversation. It is creating room for young people to engage in multiple ways. Something that we remain conscious of is that in a room where there are 15 people, they probably have different styles of learning. Somebody might enjoy reading, somebody might enjoy listening, somebody might enjoy doing. So to incorporate a lot of those different things into the same session is something that we try and do as well. So in terms of methods, we try and do this kind of using videos, using stories, using activities. A lot of that comes into the curriculum. Our curriculum on sexuality education for 9 to 13-year-olds, and I'll do a plug-in here, is actually available on our website. So people could take a look at it as well. And the first level is with young people themselves. Across the curriculum, what informs us is a solid grounding in human rights. Everything that we say should be affirming human rights. It should be taking into account the need to stand up for everybody's human rights to be realized. The second thing is it should not be binary. It should not be gender binary. It should not be sex binary. It should not be binary in terms of any identity. It should not be black and white. Every young person who could possibly exist in the world should be able to find themselves in something that is said in a curriculum. Are the bodies that we use only able-bodied, certain kinds of bodies? Is that the representation that we do in our tools? That's something that we have thought about. Are the case studies that we are talking about only of a certain class or a certain caste of people? That's something that we've also thought about. So trying to push ourselves continuously on representing as much diversity as possible in the way we implement this training, whether it is with young people or the people who work with young people, wherever. We also train organizations, and we try and train organizational leadership on understanding these issues. We do some amount of work on just diversity, inclusion, training as well. So our core work is with young people on sexuality education. As a trainer, I have done a lot of diversity and inclusion training for different organizations as well. So across, some of these principles remain common. Keep it interactive, learn from what people are saying, listen to what people are saying in the classroom and work off of that continuously. So it's also about building facilitator skills to be able to communicate effectively, to be able to respond to new cues. All of that is also skill training that we try and do as we train the facilitators to implement this work. The ultimate aim for everybody, and we realize that information levels will go down. Like trigonometry, I'll forget if I don't practice it every year. So if I don't practice something every year, if I don't learn some information every year, I'll forget it. So I might forget the 3 ways in which HIV can happen. But I will still remember. What we realize is people still remember the fact that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay for me to ask. And these are the 3 places that we identified where I can go and ask. So that I think is a long-term importance of doing this kind of work, where people feel affirmed, they feel seen and heard in that room, and they are able to confidently demand that this information, this service, which is their right, be given to them. That's really the long-term aim.
That is very nice. And I think it's a very innovative way of teaching anything for that matter. I think I haven't ever come across any educator or any trainer using so many different things in terms of adapting to how people want to learn. It is usually very set curriculum and a very set form of teaching or training that is given to anybody. So that is very nice to know. So
like, I must say that, of course, all of this is not completely, we haven't done it from scratch. Many of these actually in feminist history of work, history of feminist work, many such sort of trainings with women, trainings with young people, designs for doing this kind of work with men and boys, etc., did exist. And we have used all of them to learn and grow and take them further and further and further. So yeah, of course, all credit due to people in the movement and development work who have done this and continue to do this as well.
Definitely, yes. And that is nice to know that you are very open to change and continuously growing, and obviously more power to you and organization for doing this. So with that, I'll just jump to the next question that I have. Is you sharing any, so usually I just ask people to share one pride moment that they have or have had with maybe any pride parade or their first experience with the pride community or any of such experience that you have to share with us.
Oh God, so many. Which one do I pick? There have been a lot of strange, fantastic, overwhelming, great, fun moments across. I think except for 1 year, I have attended all the Pride marches in Delhi, which started in 2008. And I ended up there without really planning to, because a friend just dragged me along and said, okay, we have to go. And at that first Pride march, I remember in Delhi, it was supposed to start at this busy intersection of Connaught Place, which is a Central Avenue legal building. And at the last minute, the police changed something and they said, you can't start from here, you have to start from somewhere else. So I, who had never been part of any queer space, any queer thing at all till then, till 2008, actually, apart from understanding gender sexuality as part of my education in English literature in Delhi University, was there. I had not been out. I've not done any of this kind of work. I'm standing at Regal Building and suddenly my friend tells me, okay, you have to stand here, try and look for who has come for the Pride and tell them they have to go to this other location. And I was like, how? And it was like an hour of trying to look at all kinds of, really people who had, of the kind who had never met, right, till then, like across classes, across ages, hijra person coming in an auto saying, okay, yahi hai na, me telling her, no, you have to go somewhere else. The auto wala saying, okay, I'll take her. Me using all kinds of politically incorrect gaydar filters and saying that person looks like they could be here for Pride. Should I tell them they're in the wrong place? That was my first experience of Pride. After that, there have been many. I think what has been the most wonderful thing to see about Pride is that magically every year when the gathering starts, in the years that I've been involved in organizing it, you go feeling still the sense of trepidation, saying, oh, somebody will come, not come, what will it be like, will it all go okay? And then in the last year that we did have Pride, which was 2019, I reached a bit late. And I saw this endless sea of people, like 2018, 2019, this was a huge crowd of people over there. And the most wonderful thing to see in that crowd for me, after having experienced for many years, this thing of, people are, it's a handful, only a handful, and people still growing up to an older age, feeling that it's only me and not finding anybody else. being in this huge crowd of people in Delhi, which was my home turf, which I knew fully, completely. I'd been part of organizing that Pride. Reaching there, and for the first half an hour, just looking around and finding nobody who I knew, in so many people who I did not know, because I think that's been the joy of, I think, just realizing that this thing that we started as Pride has now grown and grown and grown. And it is now, that there are many others who will come in and grow it further. The fact that Pride marches happen now in Chandigarh, in Guwahati, in many other smaller cities where you could not imagine Pride happening. I think that's, all of those moments of email coming in saying, okay, we are having a Pride in Vizag this year and we need some help, are the great moments that that I have enjoyed being through.
That is very nice because we were speaking to a lot of people, and for specifically for Pride and the Pride parades, what I found out that what I usually see about is mainly Bangalore being a hub which is very accepting to Pride and having Pride parades from a really long time, and then Hyderabad also being talked about a lot. But there were very few people who spoke about any of the north or the central Indian states. So it's good to know that even Delhi has a good Pride scene and has a lot of people who participate. So that is very nice to know. So with that, thank you much for joining us today. And it was great having you and talking to you about so many insightful things. I'm sure the audience can also take a lot of things from you in terms of educating and creating awareness. So just thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me in this conversation, and all the best to all of you for the work that you continue to do.